Thank you for joining us today. I am Congresswoman Joyce Beatty, and I have the distinct honor as serving as the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. We come today united, standing up for something that we have a long history of fighting for, debating, and yes, winning, and that is voting rights. So it is no secret or surprise to you today when we say the fierce urgency of now voting rights. We are calling on the Senate to vote. We're calling on the Senate to have that debate because we want to pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We want to pass the Freedom to Vote Act. We know how much we have fought for. Yesterday, I was proud to join President Biden and Vice President Harris in a place of profound civil rights and voting rights history to advocate for the most foundational, sacred thing that I can think of. It makes me emotional. When I think of as a black woman, I must stand here today before you asking us to do something that the past 5 presidents have done and 4 white Republican presidents reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. So the real question you should ask yourself is what happened? What happened with this last president that got us to where we are today, that my colleagues will not stand up and pass the Voting Rights Act? Is it because we win? Is it because we vote? That is what you should ask yourself. Let me end by saying that the president made it very clear. Where do you stand? Do you stand with Dr. Martin Luther King or George Wallace? Do you stand with John Lewis or Bill Clinton? Do you stand with Abraham Lincoln or Jefferson Davis? We stand here, civil rights leaders, advocates, legislators, lawyers. We stand here fighting for the people. And so today, I'm going to bring several members up, and we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do the floor house 1 minute for you, with the exception of our leader and majority whip, Clyburn. And then I'm going to ask my members to join me. Birthday lady, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, will join me at the podium. Former chair of the CBC, and good to have our good friend Ifume back, will join us to help address questions. With that, Congressman James Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I want to surprise you with this. I don't think there is any issue more emotional with members of the Congressional Black Caucus and our constituents than the issue of voting. I don't believe there's any group of people other than the Congressional Black Caucus and our constituents that are really practical when it comes to the political process. No group is any more practical than we are. And that is why when we sent the For the People Act, H.R. 1, and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, H.R. 4, over to the Senate, and we saw significant reticence on the part of various senators when Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia expressed support for the People Act, except that he had some misgivings about parts of it. So when he decided that he could put together legislation that he thought would be bipartisan, and he proposed what he called the Freedom to Vote Act. Every member of this caucus lined up in support of it, demonstrating the practicality of the political process. So the Freedom to Vote Act is not our bill. We agreed to support Senator Joe Manchin's bill. So that's what this bill is. And we are finding some real issues trying to figure out why is it that when we decided to support his bill, he seems to be supporting a filibuster of his own bill. That to us is very disconcerting. Finally, I think that all of us in the Congressional Black Caucus are very understanding of our history. The 13th Amendment freed the slaves. The 14th Amendment gave us rights of due process and equal access. But it was the 15th Amendment. It took another amendment to the Constitution to give the newly freed slaves a right to vote. That amendment passed on a straight party line vote.
Yes.
So we take exception, grave exception, when anybody tells us that legislation cannot have credibility unless it is bipartisan. You're saying to us that the 15th Amendment is without credibility. So we're asking all of our friends, inside and outside the Congress, to be careful with that. That's not what history teaches us. And I'm pleased to yield to Chairman Jeffers.
Thank you, Mr. Whip. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership, to all the members of the Congressional Black Caucus. The right to vote is precious. The right to vote is sacred. The right to vote is central to the very integrity of our democracy. You can't have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people unless every single American has the unfettered ability to choose their representatives and fully participate in American democracy. The voter suppression epidemic that has been unleashed by the radical right is unacceptable, unreasonable, unfathomable, unconscionable, and un-American. We must crush it, and we will crush it. That is why it's essential, it's important, it's necessary, with the fierce urgency of now, to pass the Joe Manchin Freedom to Vote Act and the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. By any means necessary, including reforming a filibuster rule that is dripping in racist history in defense of slavery and Jim Crow. On this issue, make no mistake, when it comes to the protection of the voting rights of every single American, we shall overcome.
Last week, we marked 1 year since insurrectionists stormed the U.S. Capitol to overturn a Democratic election. In the weeks before the attack, some Republicans made despicable, false claims against voters in my state of Nevada. But they failed. Their insurrection failed. And in the years since, Nevada has made protecting voting rights our sacred mission. Today, the Congressional Black Caucus is here to use our power and our message to call on our Senate colleagues to protect the freedom to vote. Seize this moment. Pass the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Pass the Joe Manchin Freedom to Vote Act. Guarantee safe, secure, and free elections for all Americans. The world is watching us, and now is the time to stand up for our democracy.
Hi, I'm Congresswoman Terry Sewell, and I proudly represent Alabama's 7th Congressional District, which includes the historic civil rights cities of Birmingham, Selma, and Montgomery. It was in my hometown of Selma 56 years ago where John Lewis and the foot soldiers shed blood on a bridge for the equal right of all Americans to vote. But as we know, old battles have become new again, as state legislatures across this country erect deliberate barriers to the ballot box, trying to silence a certain group of people. These new laws may not require us to count how many jelly beans are in a jar, but modern-day voter suppression is no less pernicious. Yesterday, I was honored to join President Biden and Vice President Harris and our Madam Leader of the Congressional Black Caucus, Joyce Beatty, as the President spoke of an urgent need to protect the sacred right to vote. I applaud the President for being unequivocal in his statement that by any means necessary, we must change the rules in the Senate and pass the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act. Our nation is at an inflection point. Voting right legislation will go to the Senate floor and it must pass. You know, we're on the anniversary, the cusp of the Martin Luther King celebration day, Monday. But there can be no celebration without liberation, without freedom, without the right to vote. As we prepare to observe the birthday of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, let us remember that justice delayed can be justice denied. The time to act is now. Nothing is more fundamental to our democracy than the sacred right to vote. The time to talk is over. It's now time to act.
My name is Colin Allred. I represent Texas's 32nd District. I'm proud to be here with my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus, but I'm also a former voting rights lawyer. I can tell you, we knew when we'd go into court, there'd be some judges that we weren't going to get a good ruling from. We knew that the courts might not be on our side, but we always had the law. We had the Voting Rights Act. We don't have that protection right now. And we know that it's not going to be the courts that are going to protect our rights right now. It's going to have to be us in the Congress. And so the Congressional Black Caucus is coming together today to say to the United States Senate that there is nothing more important. After our Capitol was attacked by people trying to overthrow our democracy, after a rash of laws have passed across this country to try and make it harder for certain Americans to vote, in the state of Texas, where it was already the hardest state in the country to vote, they just went and made it harder. That now is the time to act. That believe us when we tell you. I've spoken to voters who've been disenfranchised. I can see the light go out of their eyes, the belief in our democracy leave them. We have to restore our democracy, and this is the time. We cannot let a Senate rule that is based and was used almost exclusively to prevent civil rights, prevent us from rising to this moment. I know all of us in the Congressional Black Caucus will do everything we can, but we're calling on the United States Senate, and we're calling on a few senators in particular to rise to this moment. Pass your own bill, Senator Manchin. Pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Give us the tools to rescue our democracy and let the chips fall where they may in the next elections. Thank you.
I'm Val Demings, representing Florida's 10th Congressional District. We are the home of the brave, land of the free, the greatest nation in the world. But we are here today to hold America to its promise. I stand today remembering my parents My father was a janitor and my mother a maid. My dad used to go to work 7 days a week to make ends meet for our family, but I cannot remember a time that my parents did not cast their vote. They saw it as their civic duty. My parents understood that their vote, while they didn't have a lot of money, their name was on no buildings, their name wasn't famous, people didn't rise when they walked into the room, that their vote mattered. And it mattered just as much as the richest man or woman in town. We can talk about health care, we can talk about civil rights, we can talk about women's rights, we can talk about Social Security, Medicare, education. But all of it is at risk. All of it. Everything that you care about, regardless of your party, and everything that we care about is at risk if we do not protect the right to vote. We're not going anywhere. We're dang on sure not going back. We will use every tool within our power to protect the precious, sacred right to vote.
Good afternoon. I'm Joe Neguse, representing the great state of Colorado. And as Representative Sewell reminds us, in just a few days, tens of millions of Americans will commemorate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. And of all of the insightful things that Martin Luther King imparted us with here in his time as Earth, there's one quote that's always resonated with me, and I suspect some of my colleagues, which is that the time is always right to do what is right. The time to safeguard voting rights, to protect voting rights, and to advance voting rights is now. Not next year, not next month, not next week, here and now. And in the face of over 400 laws that have been introduced in the last year to restrict voting rights in Florida and in Texas, in Iowa and in Georgia, all across the country, we know the stakes couldn't be higher. So to our colleagues in the Senate, we simply say that the eyes of the world are on you. The world is watching. The country is watching. And the Congressional Black Caucus is watching. We hope you will do the right thing.
Good afternoon. I'm Mondaire Jones, representing New York's 17th Congressional District. Our democracy is in crisis. The insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th of 2021 told us so. And now the same party that incited that violent attempted overthrow of the federal government because of the deep unpopularity of its policies is seeking to disenfranchise large swaths of the American electorate, chief among them Black and brown voters. There is a way to stop that from happening. We must pass Joe Manchin's Freedom to Vote Act and the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. We are faced with an existential question about whether we will have representative government for we, the people, moving into this upcoming year. And the answer can be yes, but only if we use the limited time we have available to us, only if we use the power that the American people have given to us to secure the fundamental right to vote. We know that voting rights are preservative of all other rights, and nothing comes close to being as important, certainly not a filibuster of accidental origin that has been weaponized to block the same kinds of civil rights legislation that we are simply trying to enact into law today. This is legislation that was previously non-controversial in the early 2000s. I remember marching with the NAACP in Washington, D.C. as a young activist to reauthorize the original Voting Rights Act, which was done unanimously in the Senate. When does that ever happen? And nearly unanimously in this chamber. And so we have got to do the right thing, and we have got to prevail upon, with the help of the President of the United States, who has endorsed filibuster reform, Senators Manchin and Selma, to rise to this occasion and to make an exception for the purpose of saving our ailing democracy. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester. I represent the state of Delaware. I'm the last of the 1 minutes. And it's really hard. It is unbelievable that we are standing here. Today, the Congressional Black Caucus is here to say the time is now. I was fortunate yesterday to travel with the Georgia delegation, so many members of the Congressional Black Caucus, Terry Sewell, and our chairwoman, Joyce Beatty, who has exhibited incredible leadership and has shown the country that the CBC, all of us, will stand up and fight, even go to jail for voting rights. I was honored to hear our president and our vice president, the first woman, the first African American and Asian American, speak about the urgency of now, but as unequivocally talk about January, how they did with January 6th, talk about how high the stakes are. And I think everybody here pretty much summed it up. It is about access, people having access to the ballot, which Martin Luther King talked about. Give us the ballot. It's about suppression and trying to stop people from getting water on a voting line when they're just trying to exercise that right. And it's about subversion, stealing elections. We are the conscience of the Congress, the Congressional Black Caucus. And many of you have seen, I carried this scarf on day one. I carried it the day of the insurrection. I carried it to Atlanta. It is from Georgia. It was the oath that allowed my ancestor to have the right to vote. It took brave people to stand up and vote to end slavery. The reality is, had there not been courage before, we would not be standing here. And so today, we say to the members of the Senate to pass the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, to pass the Freedom to Vote Act, to know that this is not just about a policy, this is about our entire democracy, our way of life. I'm proud to be a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, and I'm proud to say this is our power and this is our message to the Senate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all of my colleagues. We will take a few questions, but let me just say thank you to my colleagues. It's always the right time to do what's right. The fierce urgency of now. And one last one from Martin Luther King. Doesn't matter where you stand in the time of comfort and convenience, but it is the actions that you take during a time of challenges and controversy. It is the time now, Senate, to take that action. Elected officials, don't hide. Don't not support voting rights and then dare to celebrate King's birthday. Stand with us. We'll take questions as I ask Sheila Jackson Lee and Kwesi Fume to join me at the podium. Are there any questions? And we'll ask you to monitor the questions for a timing.
Madam Chair, thank you. This, as a caucus as a whole, what are you doing? Have you had any direct conversations with Senators Manchin or Sinema? Are you doing anything as a caucus to put additional pressure on them? And then secondly, obviously President Biden will be here tomorrow. Do you think that can change hearts and minds beyond his speech earlier this week? And if these bills fail again, what is the plan B?
Well, first of all, let me say yes, yes, and yes. Yes, that on behalf of the Congressional Black Caucus, and you heard our majority whip say he has met with Manchin and talked with those senators. I have met with Selma, a colleague of mine, when I came in as a freshman to Congress and a friend. So we've had a number of conversations. I've had a conversation with Senator Manchin, too many to count with Senator Schumer. And let me just say the Congressional Black Caucus brought Senator Schumer into our official caucus meeting where we've had a dialogue. He was most gracious yesterday in taking time from his meetings to talk with me multiple times. So we are conversing. They know where we stand, and we've seen progress. You know, we brought him into the caucus and we started talking about it had to happen now. Before the King's breakfast, we wanted to see action. Within 48 hours, he was talking to the media using by January the 17th or the King's birthday. And I take great pleasure in saying that happens because of us. We've not been silent. So, to your questions, we've met with the president, the vice president, as Congresswoman Lisa Blunt Rochester said, we flew out on the plane with them. And I assure you, going and coming back, one conversation: voting rights, being more engaged, and taking the debate, making the debate, and taking the vote. I'll go here. And then I'll go there. No, I'll go to you and then I'll go back.
Do you wish then the Senate, you mentioned your conversation with Senator Schumer, do you wish the Senate moved sooner on this? Like they spent a lot of time on the Build Back Better agenda. Was this something that should have been taken up last fall when this first got started with the John Lewis rights voting rights bill was first introduced and stuff?
Well, clearly, we want voting rights. We can't look back to what didn't happen before. Certainly, when you work hard, the House has done their job. We voted on it. We passed it in the House. We would have liked that continuum to have taken place. It didn't, so here we are now wanting the voting rights. Do you want to add anything to that, Sheila?
I know my colleague will as well. Let me just combine the two questions that have been asked. And I think you need to take a clear look at us. We love our fellow members, but you're looking at black faces. You're looking at faces that are the direct target of the lack of voting protection. I stand here, I believe, as the first member who lost her district in redistricting that was pointedly attempting to eliminate two black members who happen to be members of the Congressional Black Caucus. I am not imagining, I am speaking. So here's what I think in terms of both your questions. There is no doubt that we have lived and breathed and constantly been involved in discussing from the very minute that Terry Sewell introduced this bill and before. I was here for the reauthorization and back in the 2000s, helped write it, and it was everybody together. You have to ask the question, why when the size of the numbers of votes in 2020 was so large and so full of color that you had the big lie and the insurrection. And so I don't want this to be looking this way at the Congressional Black Caucus, or do we wish that they had done it earlier? There are two obstacles. Members in the Senate who are willing publicly to say that they're opposed, that happen to be Democrats, and then the new Dixiecrats, the Republicans, who have race as a blinder that they can't see. So I simply want you to say, and I think the answer is, we are here now today. Let us have the courage of our convictions today. I sent this 5-page letter to Senator Manchin. I've given him enough time to respond. I will make it public now. And it only suggests if he could have the courage of West Virginia that succeeded from Virginia because they did not want to support slavery. So I just simply end by, we have done everything we could. We are very grateful to the President and Vice President, grateful to Majority Leader Schumer and to our chair. But I want it to be looked out. The question needs to be asked of those who are stopping the vote in the Senate, can you understand Dr. King's words that I will close with. And he said, "We shall overcome. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice."
Thank you.
If we get that done, if he thinks that way, if he's courageous, all of this will be for naught to get rid of the filibuster.
Thanks. We'll go there, there, and then we'll probably have to close out for votes. Okay?
There's been some new reporting about potentially using a NASA bill as a shell to move it back to the Senate, the Freedom to Vote Act, to speed it up, avoid some sort of procedural hurdles. But inevitably, it still seems like it's heading towards a filibuster in the Senate. Do you have any reaction to some of this new legislative maneuvering as a procedure? Is it sufficient, do you think?
I don't know that it's new. Certainly, if you look back to history, we have done all kinds of things. We do what we want to do. Certainly, there has always been an opportunity in our process that you can bring a process to procedure vote to the floor. You can also have a bill in the House and put a bill in it and send it back then to the Senate, which you're making reference to the NASA bill. We've done that throughout our history. For us, we're very clear. We want to vote and we want to send it to the president now. So, however it can happen, I think Mr. Clyburn set the history out well when we're not going to hold ourselves to whether it's bipartisan or the process. I don't want to be flippant. I want a bill. I want it passed. It is the Senate's process for however they get it done. We want it signed by the president. Next.
What do you say to your constituents and voting rights advocates who are growing concerned if either bill isn't passed as we approach the 2022 midterm elections?
I feel sorry for those on the other side who didn't support this. You know, we're very clear. Our constituents understand where we are. Our constituents understand at all levels. They understand victory. They saw a black president elected because they voted and they stood in line for 5 to 7 hours to vote. You have heard the president himself say, "Thank you, Majority Whip Clyburn. Thank you, South Carolina. Thank you, black people, for voting overwhelmingly to elect him." That then got us our first female, black, Asian American vice president. Our people know that. Our people understand that. Who should be afraid are those who won't stand up for voting rights. So we're sending a clarion call, and you can print this. Shame on you for not doing it. Black folks will vote no matter what. So it's not what's going to happen to us. It's what's going to happen to them. Okay, and then
If the filibuster is removed and both of these bills do end up able to pass, would you be concerned then without a filibuster if a future Republican Congress could come in and potentially implement voting laws like the ones in Georgia and Iowa that were referenced earlier in this press conference, except this time they could be on a national level and there would be no filibuster to stop it?
Well, let me just say, if you expected me to count on what my racist colleagues and folks on the other side have been doing, doesn't matter whether there's a filibuster or not. They're going to do what they're going to do. Look at January the 6th and what happened. Look at some of the laws that they're putting in place. So for us, it's the urgency of now. For us, it's getting the voting rights law passed, signed by the president, and I'll worry about 2 years when I get to 2 years. Kwesi, would you want to say anything to close us out?
Kwesi Mfume of Maryland. I want to thank our chair, our caucus leader, our whip, all the members of this distinguished caucus that are with me and around me to just underscore and perhaps put in historical context why this means so much to all of us. 34 years ago, in this building, a young John Lewis stood with me as we went to a press conference, unknowing what we were going to deal with. And one of the questions that came up was, well, what is the priority of the Congressional Black Caucus? And John and I, because we had a way of just linking arms, stood at the podium and almost in unison said, it is the right to vote and to have every vote counted and the protection of those rights. He never wavered, never, ever wavered. And so when there was an opportunity for me to leave the Congress and to give up what a lot of people think are the trappings of power, John and his late wife Lillian and I sat down together and said, you know, you really are going to have to accept this offer from the NAACP. You're going to have to leave the Congress and you're going to have to go out into the hinterland and do on the outside what both of us and so many others have been trying to do on the inside. And so I left to head up the NAACP for almost 10 years and to work in every state in this nation on the notion of a very basic concept that he held up to his death that was near and dear to his life, the right of people to cast an unfettered ballot with every expectation that that would be counted. And so it was irony for me to come back after being away for 24 years and to see John in the state he was in when I got back. And he called and he said, well, my friend, you've come back in from the cold. But the fight, that fight that we talked about in 1987 is still very much alive. So when the chairwoman talks about the visceral meaning of this to all of us, or the gentlewoman from Delaware or anyone else, it is not contrived. It is what we believe, it is what we feel, it is in our DNA, and is what we are compassionately committed to, no matter what. Trust me, John Lewis is in this room now. His spirit, 34 years later, still resonates in this building. And the tragedy is that we are now fighting the same fight that many of us thought was behind us. The Senate of the United States will be forced, and I hate to even say that, but they're being forced to take a vote on this. It's convenient if the vote never comes up, but it will come up. And everyone will be judged by history on how they stood, on how they acted, on how they voted when the rights of Americans all across this country to vote and to have those votes counted would in fact come before them. I urge everyone in the Senate to think about the things that have preceded you and all of us, to think about this nation, to think about the history of segregation and Jim Crow, the history of exclusion, so that when you cast that vote in the Senate, you are casting it to do away with those things, not to reaffirm them. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Our power, our message. This ends our press conference. Thank you. Thank you all for coming, to all the members. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you, dear. Thank you. Well done.
Thank you. Sure.